Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, I am so delighted to be here. Deb Sabaris and Lisa Griffiths and I have been hatching this plan for a couple of years now. We met back in New York several times and thought, hey, let's come on over here and tell you what we're doing. So I'm so pleased, and just going to take a minute to take you in because this is great. So here I am, Deborah Rubien, and I work with New York City Administration for Children's Services. I'm very excited to tell you about the work we've been doing. I have been doing child welfare for decades now. New York City is in a great spot. We've done really well, and we have a lot of information sharing back and forth to have with you. So we have brought on, originally, as Deb said, it was 11 models. We're down to 10 models of evidence-based now. One model just left New York. Had nothing to do with us. It wasn't personal. They just closed shop in New York. But in today's presentation, I will be telling you about the expansion of evidence-based practice in our child abuse prevention system, how we used implementation science at all phases of implementation, the many things we've done at our agency to support the implementation, and what we are doing to sustain our future state of prevention services. So let me organize myself with that's what you were supposed to be seeing. And I couldn't resist. I just had to put this slide in, connecting the dots between Melbourne and New York City. And there really are so many dots. As I hear what is going on and what the center is doing and what you are all doing, I can tell that we have a lot to learn from you and vice versa. So I'm very delighted to be here. I like to start by giving you the overall picture. That's how I think. I like to see the big picture and then let you know where we fit in. So New York City Administration for Children's Services, I will call it ACS for now. We are the New York City governmental agency. We administer the child welfare. We brought in juvenile justice recently, and we also do early care and education services. So New York City, we've got a population of 8,623,000. ACS is a large agency. I have 7,000 employees now, but I think we're up to 7,500. We have added new employees. We just put out a solicitation for all new youth workers because we have, just as of last Monday, we've raised the age where young people are no longer adjudicated as adults when they're 16 and 17. We were one of the last states, so we just brought in a few hundred new workers. So that number keeps going up. We also do foster care. Okay. Let me go back. For child protection, we are responsible for all child protection in New York City, not in the state. So we do the investigations ourselves. We do that directly. Last year, we conducted almost 60,000 investigations. Every call that comes in through our state hotline must be investigated. There is no choice about that. So it was close to 60,000 investigations. We also oversee foster care. Again, we don't provide the foster care directly. We contract with a number of nonprofit provider voluntary agencies. I think it's about 35 agencies. And we also have a very robust prevention system. Those, again, are services. That's where a lot of our evidence-based models are, and they are provided by nonprofit providers. So we're not providing it ourselves directly, but we oversee and monitor the 54 agencies that do provide the services. That's going to be the bulk of my talk today, is about prevention services. I call it prevention with a capital P, because we've just adopted that word. So when I talk about these services, these are child abuse prevention services. I'll tell you more about those. The majority of the families that come to preventive services come through our protective services. Going back to the 60,000 investigations, of course, there's only a small number of those young people who need to go into care. And many, many of those families are assessed for what kind of services they need, and they are referred to our preventive services array. So Those 54 agencies are receiving most of their referrals through our protective services. Again, a little bit more about protective services. We did almost 60,000 investigations last year. That involves 80,000 children. When we do investigations, by the way, our investigators have to go out within 24 to 48 hours. They investigate a family for 60 days, and within those 60 days, they need to put services in place for a family. Of those investigations, 26% were for abuse, and we have up here what kind of abuse. 12% were physical, 12% substance abuse, and the remainder of the allegations were of neglect. We have an indication rate of about 36 to 42%, and interestingly enough, that has not really budged in the last decade. And last year, we had 3,647 children enter foster care. Prevention services. Again, will be the bulk of what we're talking about today and where the evidence-based models reside. So we have 54 providers across New York City. They administer over 200 programs. So in our prevention system, we have, at any point in time, we have slots to see 13,000 families. So in calendar year 2017, we saw almost 20,000 families, representing almost 45,000 children. Again, about 80, I think it's actually higher, I think it's about 85% of those families are referred to our prevention program from investigations. So rather than remove a child from a family, we know that is, I have a history, a background in child development. It's harsh, right? There are some children that may need to be removed for safety, but removing is a very harsh path to go, and we try very hard to keep families together and put services in place to keep those families together. Our preventive services also can take referrals from the community. You can walk in and get a referral. You can walk in and get preventive services. A school social worker can make a referral, the hospital social worker, et cetera. I used to run a prevention program, and that's what would happen. The people in the neighborhood in that district would get to know you, and the hospital social worker knew to pick up the phone and call you and talk, or the school social worker, et cetera. Very much a community-based program. Okay, so here I've just described the preventive system. And then of those 13,000 slots, about 25% are now evidence-based models. Because evidence-based models, there's a shorter length of service, a time of treatment. About 34% of the cases were seen through an evidence-based practice. That translates to 5,000 families. So again, 11 evidence-based. We asked for evidence-informed practices and also promising practices. Very much what your minister was saying. You want to have programs that are grown in the community and tried here. Many people are doing very great work. If it hasn't been, it may not have been researched yet, it doesn't mean it's not great work. And so we want to make room for all of that to happen. Okay, this slide. This is the slide. This is why I'm here. Take in this slide. Children in families receiving prevention services from 1996 to 2017 went up 221%. That's a big rise in prevention services. Then look at the other graph, and this is what makes me so proud. Children in foster care. In 1996, we were almost 42,000 children in foster care. We are now under 9,000. It's amazing. Our foster care numbers are going down. We are one of the only jurisdictions in the state, in the United States. I think there are a couple of others where the numbers are going down. We have a big opioid epidemic in the United States, and it's causing a huge increase in the foster care numbers. But in New York City, our numbers have continued to decrease. So we have a lot to talk about. And we think that it's a big part of it. It's not the only part, but a big part of it are the prevention models and the evidence-based practice that we've been using, which, while our entire system is not evidence-based, I think it has strengthened our entire system and strengthened our workforce as well. Okay, so remember that slide. That says it all. This has some more particulars, again, showing that the number of children in foster care, the decrease in the last 11 years. So the children entering foster care, and then the next slide is the children in actual foster care. So I'll go back to the other slides. So again, in 2017, about 3,900, which shows a slight increase from the year before, but still our total numbers in foster care are decreased. So why did we do evidence-based models? What happened? Well, the thing that is important to note, and I tell people all the time, is we did not bring evidence-based models in to a vacuum. We have already had a robust system of preventive services. Back in the mid-1970s, in fact, New York State passed legislation to start preventive services. So we have a long history of providing preventive services. We had positive outcomes in some early pilots that we did in 2007. We had a small pilot in juvenile justice and a small pilot in teen prevention, and they both had good results. Fewer children in placements. And so because of that, our ACS commissioner at that time decided to bring evidence-based practice to a larger scale to all of prevention. And by the way, I've learned that we use commissioner differently than you use commissioner. Our commissioner equals your minister, I think. So it's our commissioner is the person in charge of the entire city agency. You saw our numbers, but even if the numbers were much smaller, families are complex. The stress on families is complex. I'm sure we're all feeling it in this room, right? What we face today versus 10 years ago. So the goal was to address the increasing complex needs of families by providing more targeted and more varied services. And we kept hearing this from our frontline staff. Our child protective staff wanted more types of programs to refer their families to. They were frustrated about the one-size-fits-all programming that we had before. So we didn't know what we didn't know, and we brought in a lot of programs at one time. There were 11 to begin with, and because of my role, that meant anything I did, I had to do 11 times. So if we were developing a monitoring tool or a logic model, everything was done 11 times. So we had a very broad array of services. Some of these Deb mentioned, I know are here in your communities. Some are not, some are very small. Some of these programs were started by a single academic person who doesn't have the infrastructure to expand. But we did a lot of work to bring in these models. We have models that focus solely on young children. If you see there's Safe Care up there, you have that too. That's for children 5 and younger. It's a model that's very much module-based, and it's been great. It's been really good. It was implemented really well. The director who implemented that program, oh boy, did she support her staff. She's one of those folks who follows her staff and helps them get through graduate school, and they maybe started with a high school education and just grow with the program. And so her program reflected that. Another model for young children is a trauma-informed model. That's called child-parent psychotherapy. As you I know in the room, I went in there and said, how can we bring in models and not have trauma-informed models in a child welfare system? It's almost, being removed for foster care is traumatic, no matter how you slice it. We have models that specialize in teens. We have models that specialize in family therapy, using a family systems approach. We have a model. Trauma systems therapy is considered a promising practice. It works with teens who have had trauma. I love this model. I hear case presentations, and every case presentation I hear, my jaw drops at what they do and how much they get in there with the family and do whatever it takes and are with that teen and the whole family. We have models that help families identify the behaviors that brought their family to the attention of the system. We have a model that focuses on teens with substance abuse and other challenging behaviors. We have a model, MST-CAN, that will only work with families that have had an indicated case of abuse and neglect within the last 180 days. That is one of their inclusionary criteria that we can't mess with. You'll hear me talk a lot about the alignment we've had to do, but we also are always cognizant of what are the core components of a model that keep the model integrous. And we believe this could be one of the largest and most diverse municipal continuum of evidence-based family and child services in existence. I think you're right behind us. And bringing in many, many models. One of the things I want to say is that key to achieving this is that we brought in an implementation science expert. That was Dr. Allison Metz. She works at the National Implementation Research Network. And they also have a lot of open source materials on their website. So again, it's the National Implementation Research Network, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she has helped guide our work a lot. So here we were. This is the initial phase. How did we do it? We did research. We selected models that were used in our early pilot programs. We scanned for other models. It was Dr. Metz actually who brought to us a model called Family Connections, which was one of the only models actually started in child welfare. So many of the other models were started in substance abuse or juvenile justice, and that was a model that was started in child welfare. We also focus on evidence-based practices that focus on in-home services because we wanted the services to happen in families' homes. We spoke with a lot of the developers about the fit with child welfare. This, I know people always want to say the lessons learned, what did you learn from this? This is the part where we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know that bringing in these models to a child welfare system was different. And I don't think the model developers knew it either. So we've had a lot of work there, a lot of work to make these models work in the child welfare system. The other thing we did as part of implementation science is we started with a listening tour. Allison Metz met with a lot of our internal stakeholders at ACS. Again, I told you it's a large agency, 7,000 people, and so we pulled people from different divisions in the agency. She also talked to developers. She also talked to providers. We met with providers also using evidence-based models already, and we developed logic models, which I will talk about in a little bit. Then we moved on to the installation phase. We put out 2 procurements. This was interesting. We put out one that was, well, they're all voluntary. So again, we did this because we thought if it was mandatory at that time, this was not going to serve us well. And if it was a voluntary use of evidence-based practice, we could start more quickly. And we did start more quickly. But that also means we are needing to go back now to fix what didn't happen because it was a voluntary procurement. And so, you know, New York City is made up of 5 boroughs, and perhaps one great model is in Brooklyn, the borough of Brooklyn, but not in the borough of Queens. So we are still aiming to fix that situation. So we did one procurement that said to providers, take your contract and just convert it. Your entire contract now has to be an evidence-based model, and it's one evidence-based model. Each contract. They couldn't combine 2 different models. We also had a second procurement. We had some new dollars, and that was for teens, to service teens. That was an interesting alignment issue. The money said it was just for teens, but some of the models that we bought with that money served 6-year-olds to 18-year-olds. But we were saying because of our money source that we could only serve 12 to 17. So those kind of small alignment issues were happening all the time. Internally at ACS, we took the results of that first listening tour that Allison Metz did with us, and we developed 3 task teams. They focused on developing our internal capacity at ACS, which is forever ongoing, evaluation and monitoring, policy and practice alignment. And those task teams started to guide the work. I became a little bit of an implementation science nut, and this was our little triangle that is put out by NIRN, National Implementation Research Network, and we used it a lot. So it shows the 3 main drivers. If you can't see it from there, it's competency, organization drivers, and leadership. Most of us end up focusing on competency. And even within competency, you have selection, training, and coaching. I would say most of us focus on training. Did your people get trained? Done, check. And that's it. So we had to learn to dig deeper. Okay, you got your training done. How's the coaching going? Is the coaching happen? Because as you know, with evidence-based practice, that is a huge piece of all evidence-based practice, that our staff is receiving ongoing coaching. And then the selection process. That's something that we often don't talk to our providers about as a government agency, but we learn to do that. We learn to talk to our providers about the selection process. How are you doing the hiring? So, for example, we would find out that there would be a large agency where all the hiring was done, in some central office, and they didn't know how to talk about evidence-based practice. They didn't know how to talk about what were the skills needed by a candidate who might be a good fit for evidence-based practice. So we talked to our providers saying, you've got to go back to your HR department, your human resource department, and talk to them about what you are looking for. Because somebody doing evidence-based work, you're home-based, you're going out in the community, it's a mindset that's not punitive, it's about what will work for family, doing anything it takes. That's a different person you're looking for. It's a different skill set. So you have to pay attention to selection. So that's just one of the examples of what we would do. I use this triangle a lot. I'm sure I'm supposed to say this in another slide, but I'll say it now, that, I would talk with developers. That's one of my jobs. And I would use this triangle, and the developer would say, well, they're not really, the administration is not really supportive, that supervisor's having a hard time, or, they would report on things, and I would say, well, have you talked to the administrators? What are you doing about the leadership piece? What are you doing about the organization drivers? So this taught us as a public jurisdiction how to talk even more deeply with our developers, to ask them and push them and prod them to work on all of these drivers that make implementation successful, not just the usual typical, have you trained everybody? What we also did was, with implementation, Allison Metz developed 5 learning modules, and all of those providers, we had 23 provider agencies that implemented evidence-based practice. They came to all 5 training modules, the learning modules. And then we brought them back a year later with a team, and we asked them to do an analysis of all their different drivers. So we had these modules also for our ACS staff. That was really important. I think the providers felt that we were putting a lot into this. And we also developed a shared language. I think, looking back, that this was a very key piece, that we all did these learning modules together and used implementation science. It also helped us as a city agency manage our own expectations of what we expected from our providers. One of the things that, I was supposed to do learning modules on this slide. How did we figure out what to include in the learning modules, what Allison Metz is she got on the phone and she talked to each and every developer. And she interviewed them on each of the drivers that were mentioned in my triangle there, the implementation triangle. So she did a driver's analysis for us, and based on those results, she developed the content for the learning modules. So for example, she found out that the developers weren't so great about using data-driven decision-making and how to teach their providers to use it. So she talked about that. They weren't working with the providers about developing implementation teams, so we did that. So that driver's analysis really helped guide our work as well. So these are some of the themes that I've already been talking about and will continue with implementation science. You heard me say that I was on the phone a lot with developers. That communication was very important. I will say more about that. The ongoing use of data and the capacity building, that is ongoing. We have turnover, everybody has turnover in their staff, but even within staff who stay, how do you build their capacity to monitor the evidence-based practice, to refer to the evidence-based practice? That is such a huge bit, and I will talk more about that. Making referrals, before our protective service workers were making referrals to 2 models, and all of a sudden now they're making referrals to 13 models. So how do we build that capacity? And then that ongoing policy practice alignment, we are still working on that. You can't see all the specifics, but the colors are really nice, right? So what happened was, this is our logic model, and this is how it got started. We pulled together leadership from all the different divisions in our agency, and we started talking about how do we sustain and integrate the models. And the first exercise we did was to understand what were the perceptions of the other parts of our agency about evidence-based practice and what was their knowledge. And I think within about 10 minutes in the room, what we figured out was that the evidence-based models were seen as very elite, a little snooty. They only dealt with one child in the family. This was some of what the fears were. They don't know anything about safety and risk. They don't work with kids like our kids. That model was developed somewhere else. And, New York has this thing, I'll just fess, like New York has this, New York is so different. I keep saying, no, New York is really not different. But you have to fight that. So it was in the room. We had to start addressing that. So that was the reason we put together this very colorful logic model. And while you can't see it, let me just quickly tell you what it is. That first column on the left, those are the standards that we have for all of our preventive providers. Regardless of what model you are, no model, anybody who gives us, provides preventive services, we have 120 pages of standards that they must follow. So that is taken right from our standards. Then the middle column says, in addition to the ACS standards, let's say for supervision, so in addition to the ACS standards for supervision, the model also expects this, to show that none of our expectations were lowered, they were just higher. We've kept all our same standards in place, and some of the evidence base has brought even higher standards. And that they all have measurable progress and lead to the child welfare outcomes that are shared. They're not a different set of outcomes. We still struggle with this. Providers say to me, they learn I won't call out any models, they learn the XYZ model, and then they also have to do child welfare. And we say, but they have to be integrated. You have to teach your staff that while they're learning the XYZ model with the fabulous interventions and therapies and steps, they're also doing child welfare, and they're not different. That helping a family with their needs, whether they are concrete needs or entitlement, that is part of the intervention. That helps a family. You can integrate that into the intervention. So I have to say we've done a fairly good job at that. We probably still have a ways more to go. And the providers face this all the time with new staff. Okay, back to the implementation model, the logic model. I had to do 11 of those. I just want you to know I had to make 11 of those for each model, but they're good. Okay, so then we started the initial phase. We began in 2013. We focused on alignment, we focused on referral pathways, we focused on monitoring. We developed strategies to promote continuous improvement. We developed a structured decision-making tool to assist with referral management. Again, those in our protective service unit division, we have 2,400 workers. So 2,400 workers had to learn about all of these evidence-based models. I confess it took me 6 months to get the acronyms right for myself, and that was just the acronyms. There was a lot to learn, and we had to figure out how to make the information available, manageable, accessible. The other thing we did is I had mentioned those standards. We have 120 pages of standards that all preventive providers are required to do and follow. We also created an addendum for all of those standards for each of the evidence-based practice. We did training to support direct service staff. That is ongoing. And we incorporated evidence-based practice into some of the existing monitoring system. We had to teach all of our monitors more about the evidence-based practice. That was the initial phase. That consultant that we work with, Allison Metz, she always said, get started, get better. And we just had to get started. Our commissioner at the time put on very tight time frames. We would talk to the developers and they go, oh no, we can't start a program that quickly. And we'd go, but you have to. And we all worked very hard to get it started, and we knew it was imperfect, but it did get started. Another thing that we did to try to organize all this information is we did a continuum of the service and place the evidence-based models into low family risk and need category, moderate, high need, and very high need. A very imperfect way, but again, we just had to get started and give people a way to understand which program might be the best fit for which family. We are still doing tremendous amount of work on this, but the continuum at least organized the information to get started. That structured decision-making tool, I just want to say that it does get filled out by every protective service worker who's making a referral, but there's a tremendous amount of human element to it. It's not a model that just spits out, put in everything, there's an algorithm, and you come out with the best model for that family. It comes out with an array of programs, and then you have to match what's available in your community. There's what you know about the family, what you know about the inclusionary criteria. So again, it's not something that's just totally automated. There's a lot of human element. We also recently created a referral management unit. It's been great. So that referral management unit, they review every referral that comes for preventive service, and they provide assistance in all referral matters. Sometimes the referral doesn't work out, or a family's not getting a service quick enough, or somebody's refused to take a referral. They handle all of that, and we hear only positive things about this referral management unit. It's been that started maybe just about a year ago, so that was not in place initially. We saw what was in front of us and realized we needed to put this in place. Some of the other things we did to help with the information is we developed 2 booklets. Again, the sharing the information is one of the biggest challenges. So in addition to doing an overview to all the CPS workers, we developed a desk guide. I work with protective services to develop that desk guide, and you listen, and the protective service staff said, 1 model per page. Don't go over 1 page. And we listened, and so we have a desk guide. It's really popular. It's out of print, and people are clamoring for them. And it gives 1-page description for each model. And then along with that, we had frequently asked questions. How did we put those questions together? I brought together lots of people from different units, especially protective services, and said, what's your question? And through that, I still heard a lot of the misinformation that was still out there about evidence-based practice, and so we put together the frequently asked questions. So again, the sharing model information, I can't emphasize enough how important that is. It's just an ongoing piece of implementation. It's an ongoing piece of sustaining the practice. We developed the desk guide. We developed the frequently asked questions. We did model presentations to frontline staff. But not only do we do the model presentations, really it's the providers. We ask the providers to contact their local borough office, because there are many, many borough offices of protective service workers, knock on their doors and give them a presentation of your model. Bring a case example, let them know what your inclusionary criteria are, let them know what your exclusionary criteria are, and talk to your local people. And that has been tremendous. That has been very effective. So we have to work at it from the ground up as well as top down. We did case presentation to all ACS leadership, that cross-divisional team that I mentioned. What I did was I brought in practitioners for each model, and they were able to give a case presentation to our very top leadership. This had a tremendous impact. You know, some of the leaders, you know, haven't had contact with a caseworker, just that alone, in years, and you get a case presentation, and the caseworker would end up in tears because they were always so connected to their family and would talk about seeing the family a year later and what the family would say. And this was really important piece, not only of knowledge development, but also to increase the buy-in of the leadership into the practice. We did model presentations also for other folks at ACS. We have a whole unit of family court lawyers. They all get presentations. We just went around to all the different boroughs and gave presentations. The referral managers, that unit I just spoke about, they get presentations. Sometimes it is from a provider. Sometimes we bring a developer in and they give the presentation themselves. We also have a whole system of family team conferences that the providers must have. All of those conferences are facilitated by an ACS facilitator. Those folks are also a key piece to having the information. And then most recently, we created e-learning modules. And so we have modules where people learn about the module and also practice making the match. Okay. Moving along. Okay. Ongoing sustainability. We have our site team. I want you to notice that it's called Sustaining and Integrating Preventive Services. Again, we're integrating it into our system. It's not a standalone. We had to keep pushing against this idea that evidence-based practices were some separate type of model. Information, I talked a lot about that. Our critical partnerships. Provider agencies, our model developers, our internal divisions. Before I talked about the feedback loops, this is what we do. When the models first started, somebody was on the phone from our agency every 2 weeks with every single provider. For the last 4 years, providers of every model have had monthly meetings at our office, ACS. For the last 4 years, I've had monthly calls with each individual developer of all those models. We also now have a quarterly developer call where all the developers are hearing what is going on at ACS that's going to impact that model. Because so often what's going on at ACS can affect the fidelity of a model. I'm going a little faster now because I've been given the warning. Okay, this was just to, again, underscore the importance of communication between the model developers, ACS, and the providers. Huge point for consideration is about the alignment and integration. I said we created new, actually I want to give you examples. We created the implementation science, but here are some examples of what we had to do to align. We had to tell all the developers, you are responsible for safety and risk. You must see all the children in the family. Some models would change their documentation, so instead of just looking at the target child, they looked at the entire family. We have a practice that every family has a domestic violence screening, and so regardless of the model, we said to the model, you have to do that domestic violence screening. We had a very high profile fatality about a year and a half ago, and City Hall, this is how it works, right? It's child welfare. We're a very reactive, crisis-driven system. So City Hall came to our door and said, you got to do something, and you have to do it quickly. So the agency put in, all of a sudden, we had to do these service termination conferences. This was so out of alignment with the evidence-based practice. So the models, all of a sudden, were waiting to close their cases. And the families were ready for closing. We've had a lot of alignment issues around that. But because we've had the relationships with the developers and we have these regular meetings, we've been able to work through a lot of those alignment issues. Okay, some preliminary outcomes. We see more families, we are achieving our goals in high-risk models. And there's been a decrease in the number of indicated investigations for families who have completed services. This slide has a lot. This last piece, decreased indicated investigations. Really, what this slide is saying, it's a lot there, is that if you finish preventive services, if you do the entire treatment of preventive services, that only 1 out of 38 families who complete a preventive program have a follow-up indicated investigation within 6 months. Only 1 of 38 families. If you did not finish the preventive services, it jumps up to 1 out of 7. So finishing the preventive services makes a huge difference. I'm going to skip this slide. This is showing the investments. That largest portion is the state. As I said, the state has been supporting preventive services for a long time, and they pay the majority of preventive system costs. The federal pays some, and the city pays some. This is just to show you our entire operating budget, and the preventive services are the orange piece. So we are at $330 million. We've had a lot of challenges. We've had staff turnover. We have to keep staff at ACS informed, the referral pathways. You've heard me talk about that. And our successes, again, the communication, the partnership, the feedback loops. Here's a little success. The evidence-based practice is in the underlying contract. So if it's an add-on and it gets hard, and it does get hard, if you talk, I'm sure there are providers in the room, all the providers say, oh my gosh, this is way harder than we thought. And if it was an add-on to the contract, I am sure that a lot of providers would have said, oh no, we're done with this. But it's in their underlying contract. That was good. So we're still here. We still have 10 models. There's not, only that one model that left voluntarily. I also think that one of the successes that does not get spoken about is the professional development of provider staff. We're raising better social workers. We have better trained staff. I know, along with my colleagues at work, we sit around and say, oh, if we had to do it over again, if we were starting now, I would go to that model because the training is so good. It's exciting. There's some excellent training out there. So overall, we are just lifting up the entire social work, the child welfare staff, I believe. Okay, all right, successes. We are still going. We're going to expand the use of evidence-based practice. We're coming up to, we have to our contracts are coming up. So we are reissuing all our request proposals for $3 billion of services in foster care and preventive services. This gives us a chance to do an analysis of where we are, where are the gaps in our preventive programs, where are the gaps in evidence-based, what additional evidence-based programs do we want to bring in, do we want to make sure that there is geographic distribution. So we have a very big opportunity. The other thing that is going on is federally in the United States, it's a positive thing that's going on federally, is that there's a new Family First Prevention Services Act, which is going to provide federal dollars to provide preventive services, and the expectation is 50% of those services should be evidence-based or evidence-informed. This is very exciting. So the whole system should start looking different, and evidence-based practices will be part and parcel of it. So we're not going anywhere. We're very committed to evidence-based practice. When I talk to my colleagues in preventive services, I had run a preventive service program, and I talk to them, they say, The work is better. There's just no doubt about it. There's my contact info. There's the last slide, and I thank you very much.